Welcome to Modern Musings, conversations with the maiden, mother, and crone, looking at ourselves and the world through the lens of the 21st century. Hello and welcome back. I'm your hostess, Amber Garvin, and I am here with my co-hosts, Kristen Hessler and Cindy Murray.
Hello.
Hello.
And if this is your first time joining us, we're glad to have you here. And we just wanted to welcome you back. This week, we are talking about women and STEM. And if you didn't know, February 11th was International Women and Girls in Science Day. So, to celebrate this, we sat down and we had a little girls' night watch of Hidden Figures. And we were just going to talk about women's achievements in science. And before we talk about that, I just want to put out there that a lot of women's achievements in science have been overshadowed by men over time. And there's actually a name for that, and it's called the Matilda effect. And that's basically is just bias against acknowledging women's scientific achievements. The Matilda effect was coined in 1993 by a science historian named Margaret W. Rossiter. And it talks about many different women over the course of history about how they have made these great achievements in science, won Nobel or been up for Nobel Prizes, which have ultimately been given to their men partners instead of them. Mm-hmm. And which kind of brings us into the movie and book Hidden Figures, because that is also about three great women in science that have been overshadowed until recently by men. So, ladies, I'm going to open this up to you. What'd y'all think of the movie? What are some great things that you got from this movie that we watched?
Well, I thought. Oh, go ahead, Kristen. Do you have?
Oh, just to kind of go along with what you're talking about, the Matilda effect. When we were watching the movie, we would pause every once in a while and be like, "How come we never heard of this? We never heard about these women." Being a part of NASA, you know, even watching like Apollo 13, there wasn't any women characters in that movie besides like the wives, right? Mm-hmm. And so we were talking about how the story was never told.
Women suffered in silence.
This was what I was just going to point out. You know, I was alive, not during the John Glenn stuff. I came after that, but I was alive during the space race. Men walking on the moon. I remember being in school and watching things like, and I don't remember ever anything talking about women. I never heard the stories of these women. And, so that was one of the things that we've talked about.
Yeah. And there are many, many women going back centuries that have been oppressed. Like women in science is not a new thing. Back before the Civil War, it was quite common to have women scientists. And I know that, you hear a lot about Marie Curie, and she's very famous and a lot of women look up to her, but there are so many more women that have been oppressed over time.
Yeah, or you say oppressed, a lot of people would have an argument with that word. I'm not arguing with your choice of word because
pushed down, pushed aside.
Overlooked.
And yes, I think the ones who were oppressed were the ones who wanted to do those things, who weren't allowed to do those things or didn't have the strength or the courage to push through and do it anyway. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. During the Victorian age, there were a lot of women doing science and things that we just never hear about because
the story wasn't told.
And that comes to one of my big points. you have to tell your own story in a lot of ways. And
Yeah.
we have been, as women, have been conditioned to sit still, look pretty, don't speak up, don't rock the boat, don't make waves, don't tell your story, and
Yeah.
so, but our stories are very, very important. Back last fall, we celebrated National Writers Month, National Novel Writing Month, and I talked about the importance of documenting your stories and different ways that you could do that. And I think that's a lot of why these stories were not heard until now, because women were not documenting those stories for a lot of reasons. And a lot of times history is written by men.
Or the winner.
Or by the
Yeah.
winner. That's the old adage that history is written by the winner. But usually the men are the ones who come out on top. They're the ones who are writing the histories. And that's why it's all about men. I thought that was an important thing that I took away from that movie, was that those stories should have been told right along with the
Glenn going to space.
Glenn going to space.
Exactly.
We kind of celebrate the engineers who came up with this stuff, maybe not so much by name. Some of them that we did, like the German rocket scientists and stuff that helped us come up with that technology and stuff. But in the movie, the thing that comes to mind for me is the scenes where Paul Stafford, who was a composite character of some of the engineers in the Space Task Group at NASA, he would not let her put her name on the reports, or he kept telling her she couldn't put her name on the reports. And it to me, that had less to do with her being black. It was really more about her position there, because he said it was because she was a computer, not an engineer, and only the engineers could write papers, and she was not an author of the paper, even though she did the math. And I think that goes back to that whole thing where, the men were the ones who controlled the narrative there. And that did eventually change, but it took time and it took persistence, and a quiet persistence. She didn't go to her boss and say, I want to be put on this report because I wrote all this stuff. And I think in part his reluctance to have her be part of that, he used that excuse of her being a computer, but it really stemmed from the fact that he felt threatened by her. And a lot of times that's what has happened with women throughout history, is that the men who surround them, the men who write these histories, feel threatened by the women. And even if they don't admit it themselves,
Or they may not even
realize it. Yes. And so they feel threatened, and the easiest way to keep it in their control is to control it. And I think we've found that throughout history, that women have been controlled by a lot of different things. Simple thing in this movie, they were talking about the NASA dress code. I don't know how much of this is true. A lot of this book and movie were kind of fictionalized to make a better story. But they talked about the dress code for women being high heels, a skirt below the knees, and pearls. Well,
I mean, it may not be true in NASA at that time, but it has. It has historically been true. Yes.
Yes, because I remember my grandmother worked in medical records at the hospital, and part of their dress code was she had to wear hose.
Yes, that was part of the dress.
I used to work.
This was in
Dillard's,
the 90s.
It was the same thing in the 2000s. I worked at Dillard's, and my dress code was hose, dress below, like at the knee, and hose.
Yes.
And dress shoes. Specifically, they wanted me to wear heels.
Right.
And I pushed back on that because I can't wear heels.
Right. And you know, the difference is that you don't see men having to wear a specific kind of pants or a specific kind of shoe. They just say dress shoes.
Yeah.
They just say dress pants. But women, no dress pants. So,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, that is a form of oppression because women cannot function in the same way a man can if they're wearing a dress and high heels. You cannot do a lot of things.
No, you can't work on an oil rig or construction in a dress.
Well, and you can't climb a ladder to get a box off the top shelf. You can't bend over to help a customer fit for their shoes. You have to squat a certain way or sit in a certain chair. It is very controlling and limiting to your ability to function in your role.
Most definitely.
And so, you know, there's a lot of rules like that in a lot of workplaces that are, you know, a lot of workplaces demand that their women, the women there wear makeup. Do you ever see them requiring that a man wear makeup? Absolutely not. Now, so I'm off on this little tangent about, you know, oppression of women, but, you know, really getting back to that whole idea of STEM, the idea of STEM is that there have always been, well, I'll say there's a drive to get more girls interested in STEM. There's a drive to get more women working in STEM. I will say, I know a lot of women engineers, a lot of women computer engineers, electrical engineers, civil engineers. I see this all the time. But it wasn't as heard of when I was younger, when I was seeking out a career. And girls often go for different tracks. They've proven that somewhere around 4th or 5th grade, and this is kind of old data, but I'm just pulling back from my memory, that around 4th or 5th grade, girls stop being as interested in STEM. That is not to say they quit being interested in STEM. But what happens is the teachers tend to start favoring boys, not intentionally, but girls are less prone to speak up in class because they don't want to be embarrassed. They
also, boys are more talkative.
Boys are more talkative. They're more courageous. They're going to stand up and answer or shoot their hands up, and girls don't. So then the teacher calls on the boys, and that in turn causes this bias, a sort of bias that starts to happen. And so they're trying to educate teachers to stop having that bias. You know, have they been successful? I don't know. I know.
I just want to point out there that as a teacher, we do this thing in my school called cold calling, or rather, I have a number board. Each student has a number, and I pick their number, and that's who I call on.
Okay.
So I let fate decide.
Well,
and it's a number wheel.
Right.
That's
good,
really
because you're not.
My students call it the wheel of death. But
right.
Yeah, it's a number wheel
like
because I
that.
spin the wheel, and that's who gets called on.
I like
but
that.
but the thing about it is that it has not always historically been that way, and teachers tend to call on their favorites. They'll call on either the person who can answer it,
or they call on the one who's not paying attention or
they
daydreaming, which is what happened to me.
So and they
I like
do
to
that
call on the ones that aren't looking at me.
Well, and that's a form of, you know, you're trying to get them to pay attention.
Yeah.
But sometimes that can be perceived by them as being picked on.
Agreed.
or whatever. And so that sets up again that bias. So I like the number thing that you do because I think that makes it more fair.
It is very fair because you know, each student gets a number, they know their number, and then I spin my little mini wheel and their number pops up.
Right.
So it's they know to expect that their number might be called.
I like that because, you know, like I say, I think it's important to promote women in STEM. I think women are equally as capable of any kind of STEM job as a man can. We've proven this. But again, a lot of times women don't tend to lean that direction because a lot of, there's this point where girls start leaning towards more creative things, the left brain, right brain.
Too, if that had anything to do with puberty, though, too, because when girls are at that age, then their bodies are also changing before boys are.
Well, and that's
so
where that
might
embarrassment,
lend them to more nurturing, and the embarrassment and all of those things kind of come into play. So
they don't want to be embarrassed in front of the boys. They don't want to be called on. They don't want to be. They want to just blend into the background, and there's a lot of really good books about a lot of that stuff too. I wish I could think of some right off the bat. I'm thinking Reviving Ophelia it's been a long time since I read that one, but there's a lot of stuff about girls and puberty and what girls go through, the mental mind shifts and things. And there's a lot of stuff there also. I think a lot of it helps too.
That's a very good example in literature of women oppression. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, Ophelia is absolutely. And I don't know if you've ever read Reviving Ophelia. Anyone who works with teenagers, I highly recommend that book because
yes, I have.
Prepubescents or teenagers, because it's an excellent look into the mind and the development of the young female psyche. But I think also that and one of the things that they talk about is the complex that girls have with their father, that father figure thing. So I think if a father, a strong male figure in that girl's life promotes or encourages her in that scientific or mathematical or engineering or whatever, in those STEM fields, then she is highly more likely to keep at it because, number one, she may have already been interested anyway, but she's getting the support of a male. And we are wired to do that. We are wired to look for that support from that strong male. And so you're getting reinforced by someone you look up to a great deal, usually. And that just really helps. A strong mother is also another thing too.
Most definitely.
But definitely a strong father who encourages the STEM interest. Dads who share astronomy with their daughters or things like that, that always encourages that. Yeah, Kristen.
You made me think of something else. In the story, the main character, she's a single mother with 3 daughters, and her daughters, this is in the 60s, so like her mom is having to help her raise her daughters, and her daughters were waiting up really late past their bedtime for mom to come home. And during this time frame, the world is still shifting from a men's workforce to men and women working.
Yeah, women.
And I think her perspective was interesting because she was also a single mother. There's an element there too, because it's hard on women to be mothers and career finders.
She even said that she had to be the father.
She
and
literally,
the mother.
She said, I have to be mommy and daddy. And not only that, but she had to be, a feminine person in the workforce, but also fighting for that spot where there's only men working. Just the parallels with her family as well as like the workforce in general. And still, women are coming into the workforce. Now, there's some companies like where I work where the majority of the employees are female. We're mostly female-run company, just because there's so much higher percentage. And some workforces are still predominantly men, like the oil field, for instance. Like you're not going to see a lot of women working out there.
That is so true, unless they're secretaries
construction.
Or something like that.
And it's hard on those type of jobs too because of the hours or the time or the labor intensive. It's hard to come home and then also be a mom, and even harder to be a single parent.
Oh yeah.
So that was one of the things that I saw too, was the dynamics within their roles at home. They touched on that nicely in the movie because, there was one husband that was a little bit resistant to his wife, being a strong working female.
Right.
And that's definitely something that women don't just have to fight it in the workplace, but we also have to fight the resistance in the home, balancing that work and life. And having that balance with your spouse too.
There are still husbands who resent a wife who makes more money than they do and will, maybe not overtly, but subconsciously sometimes do things to make it harder on her so that she doesn't want to do that anymore.
I don't even think that it's done like
that's
vindictively or on purpose. No. I think it's just because this is the way it is. Right. That was one of the phrases. It's just the way things are.
Right.
We still haven't. It's not neutral yet.
Right. Right.
Once it becomes so neutral and natural,
getting there, but not yet. Like we're still like raised by our parents and grandparents who it wasn't neutral. It was very like. Once, I guess, maybe our generation or the generation after grows up and they're used to equality of women and men in the workforce, then that will change.
Well, I quit wearing pantyhose and slips in the 80s, and my mother thought that was the most horrible thing in the world. I would wear sandals, and they were open toe, and you could see my toes. And, if I stood in the sunshine, you could see the silhouette of my legs through my dress. Oh my. And I'm like, okay, is that any different than wearing pants? Is that any different than wearing a bathing suit?
Just the initial thought, it hasn't been erased from our...
It wasn't. That was still the way they thought. And, if sometimes the groundbreakers are going to get that flack, not because anyone is intentionally trying to keep them down, but because they just haven't thought outside that box yet.
And we all still have that same knee-jerk reaction.
Right. And, my mother never thought about the fact that I go to the beach and wear a bikini all the time. Well, I don't anymore, but I did back then. And no one thought about the fact that you could see my upper legs. So why is it a bad thing if you can see it silhouetted through my skirt?
Yeah, it's just like a really interesting concept because a bikini looks like a bra and underwear.
And that was acceptable.
You can't wear your bra and underwear out in public, but you can wear a bikini out in public.
My bra and underwear cover up more body parts than some of those bikinis that I see. So, I mean, really, seriously. Our perceptions of things are because that's the way we've been conditioned to perceive them. And so in that way, we have been conditioned to think that girls don't like math, girls don't like science, girls don't want to be in STEM jobs. They want to be teachers and nurses and homemakers or, crafters or whatever. And there are a lot of women who are actually crafters as well, who hold engineering degrees and, have retired from great engineering jobs, and have contributed to a lot of important works.
I can totally get that. Like, I was definitely encouraged to become a teacher growing up.
Right.
I wanted to be a veterinarian when I was in high school. I love science, which, is why I'm the host of this podcast. But, and I tell my students this all the time. They're like, if you couldn't teach, they always ask me, if you didn't teach English, what would you teach? And I said, science. And they're like, really? You like science? And I was like, I love science, especially astronomy.
Yeah.
And, I'm not that great at math. Okay, I kind of am. But, I mean, I kind of push that part of myself aside, other than shopping math. Of course, I love shopping math.
Getting your bargains in.
Yes, exactly. That's the math that I use every day. Okay.
Well, I'm the same way. When I was young, I thought I might want to be an architect. My dad actually started school to become an architect,
Mhm.
and then he dropped out of school to work and raise a family. And later, as I got older, I decided I wanted to be an audio engineer, and that's what I went to school to be. I was like the only girl
Yeah.
in my department. There were other girls taking those
There
classes.
weren't many when Kristen and I were in
Yeah.
school either.
It was predominantly male. There were a few girls that were there while I was there, but I think I was the only girl in my graduating class. And I don't know if there had been other girls before me. I don't know, but I was pretty much a rarity. And when you went looking at the people who were working as audio engineers, we're talking television studios, radio stations,
Yeah.
recording studios. Podcasts didn't exist at that time, obviously.
A male-dominated
male
field,
dominated.
You know what?
as well. Like,
you
there were
just
a few
triggered
women.
something I never realized, but there were like no girls in my communications and
Well,
Oh yeah,
my graphics arts
Right.
stuff.
I can think of like maybe 3 or 4 in
When you
radio,
took
TV,
radio,
film.
right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think there was 2 girls in radio, TV, film when I was in school there.
Mhm.
Yeah, not very many at all. And so that that I think that kind of plays into it. But I was always fascinated with those things. But I also wasn't supported in those engineering fields or in those scientific fields. I loved earth science, which they call physics now. They called it earth
Yeah.
science when I was a kid. But I loved all of that stuff. Geology, the astronomy, everything like that. Weather. I loved all the weather and stuff too. So
Yeah, I was definitely discouraged from.
my parents encouraged me to become a hairdresser.
Oh yeah,
Not
that's
even- Yeah.
totally a
Yeah, because I could
Another
support my
female-dominated.
family, and and I think their thought is, you'll meet somebody and you'll get married and whatever, but you can make a good living. That was it. Not you can do something that you love or whatever. And I did go to cosmetology school. I got my license. You know what I loved about cosmetology school? The science. I loved chemistry. We did chemistry of shampoo and the chemistry of the dyes and the perms. I loved all of that stuff. So, but I was not encouraged to pursue those fields. And so, I didn't care too much about math. I became where I cared less and less and less about those things because it wasn't going to serve me. And so I just never did it. So,
Yeah.
I got enough math. I can do math. I actually found out as an adult that I can do math a whole lot better than I thought I could. I may not be educated in the math,
Yeah.
but I can do the math. And maybe if I had been encouraged and had spent a little more oomph at it, maybe I
Yeah.
could have done it. Now my son, he is a math minor, and he's really, really smart at math, but sometimes he talks about math and I'm like, uh-huh. And then sometimes I'm just like deer in the headlights. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So,
Yeah, I'm not so great past algebra. I mean, I can do physics okay, but I definitely what you're talking about being encouraged. I wanted to be a veterinarian. I wanted to be Dr. Amber. I wanted to work with animals when I was in high school, and I got discouraged away from that because my parents kept saying, "Oh, well, you have to do a lot of math if you're going to become a doctor."
that was
You
what
have
I got
to do
a lot.
a
You have
lot
to
of-
know a
You have
lot
to
of
do a
math.
lot of math. And, where I liked math and I was good at math, it was just math was my dad's thing. And, being the rebellious teenager that I shied away from math because it was my quote unquote dad's thing.
Right.
And so I started pursuing more creative arts,
Mm-hmm.
such as writing, which of course I was not really encouraged to be a writer either, because writers, quote unquote, don't make any money, or creative people don't make any money. And, I was always encouraged to be a teacher because that was the safe bet. And I used to tell my parents that I was not going to become a teacher. And in reality, I grew up and I did student teaching and I fell in love with teaching. So I started becoming a teacher.
Yeah. I think with Kristen, you were really good at math. I remember you hit that time frame that I was talking about, 4th, 5th grade.
Yep.
So Kristen had, I'm gonna give a little your history here, and I'm not gonna be real specific, but she was like one of the best students in 4th grade math. I got reports from her teacher all the time that she did great. And then she went to 5th grade, and she had a teacher that was not so great. And then she had another teacher that was
That's when
even...
I started liking boys. You can't blame it all
Well,
on
I
the
know,
teacher.
but you also had another a
Because
teacher.
I remember who
Well,
was in
and-
my 5th grade math
Oh, yeah.
class, and I know who that was. I was over
Well,
there staring off into
yeah,
space.
but
City.
also-
But your
but-
mom is a parent.
But,
Yeah.
but
And-
I also see other things that you didn't see, like a certain teacher whose entire class, I'm not
Oh,
going to
I
name,
remember that. Yeah.
the entire class failed the benchmark test, prepping for was it TOS at that time?
Yeah, I
Toss,
think
yes.
It was
TOS
TOS
thing.
at that time, which is the Texas Assessment of Academic
Yeah, I was
Skills.
about to say, if you're not from Texas, you probably don't know what that is.
Yeah, and so they would do benchmark tests throughout the year just to see the progress of the students, and her entire class failed. Now, who do you think is to blame for that? I'm not saying that teachers are, there are teachers who are incapable of
this
teaching.
This is a hot question that I'm really,
I know it is, and
as
I'm
a
not
teacher.
I'm not trying to go there, and I'm not trying to shame teachers at all, because I think teachers are wonderful, underpaid civil servants who give a fabulous, unrecognized service, just like the Hidden Figures people do. So, I think they are totally unrecognized for what they do. And I have a lot of friends who are teachers, and I adore them all. I do know there are sometimes bad apples, and we don't want them to spoil the whole bunch. But there are also teachers who are misplaced. My own son had one of those teachers. She was formerly a 6th grade teacher. They eliminated 6th grade from the elementary school and moved it to the junior high, but she did not want to teach junior high. So she stayed at the elementary school, and they put her teaching 4th grade. But she required her students to work on the maturity level of a 6th grader. And it caused such strife that the teachers were flocking to the principal in droves to get their child moved out of her classroom, to the point that the principal finally had to say no more people can transfer. And so then they began transferring out of the school. So,
Okay, I mean, I agree with
and I'm not saying she's a bad teacher. She was not a bad teacher. She was an excellent teacher. But she was an excellent teacher for 6th grade. That was what she was really good at. And she had unrealistic expectations for 4th graders. Now, I don't know what the problem was with the teacher that Kristen had. She could have been a bad teacher. She could have been a good teacher with bad curriculum. She could have been a good teacher in a wrong grade. We don't
We
know.
had 2 really bad kids in our class.
And really bad kids. There are, that socioeconomic divider that they use is often a predictor of children's performance, only because of the environment that they sometimes grow up in and the support levels that they get at home. So, but her entire class bombed the benchmark test. None of them were going to pass TOS. And so they all had to come in for tutoring. And right around all of that time was when Kristen's interest in math just went, Phew. Now,
Well,
it may have done that anyway. We don't know, and that's my point, is that this whole it all happens about that same time, and they are trying to find ways to address that issue, because it could be puberty kicking in, and the girls just don't want to speak up, and the girls don't want to, and if that's the case, then how do we address that? how do we make it so that the girls feel safe speaking up in class
without segregating boys
without
and girls.
segregating them or singling them out in any way. And I think that's the main issue. We want everyone to feel welcome and safe and encouraged to participate in STEM. Now, Stephen went to a STEM academy here in Carrollton at the R.L. Turner METSA Academy, Math, Engineering, Technology, and Science Academy. And it was mostly boys, but there were they recruited a lot of girls there. And I was really excited to see so many girls in those classes, and as opposed to what it might have been like 10 years earlier or something, because that program didn't exist 10 years earlier. But what would it have looked like? There may have only been one or two girls, if any. And I'd like to see more. I really do. I just don't know
I
how.
think that it's something that just happens exponentially over time, because, and I don't think it's just STEM, it's just women in the workforce and women becoming a predominant or equal part of society.
Mm-hmm.
We still haven't had a woman president yet, but we're getting so close to that you can almost taste it.
Women in politics, I mean, this is a completely different topic, but it's hard being a woman, even in a predominantly female-dominated workforce, as it is. It's hard being a woman and, trying to pay your bills and
raise a family.
Raise a family. I mean, I don't have that experience, but you know what I mean. Like, it's high expectations.
There are very high expectations.
And checking off the boxes and doing the things that you want to do. It's really hard because you especially you don't want to step over people. You don't
Mm-hmm.
want to be cutthroat, but
Right.
And it's just
and a lot
it's
of times,
hard because if you just sit back and just think that your work is going to outshine, you get overlooked sometimes.
Right. I like where you're going with that, because you're talking about you don't want to be cutthroat and things, and oftentimes, especially in my generation, a lot of women were who were career women or who put their career before their families or whatever were
looked at in a negative light,
a very negative way. And even though now there are stay-at-home dads, or there are dads that work from home, or who share equally in, and I say equally in quotes, equally in the raising of the children, a lot of times men still do not fulfill the entirety of that role. It is still looked at as the woman's role to be the nurturer in the family and come home and make dinner, even if you've had a hard day or whatever. But when I was younger, we had some very negative things to say about women who chose their career over their family. And I was probably part of that problem as well, because I was a working mom. And then I saw that my children were suffering because I had to put job before family, or the job was taking more out of me than I could afford for it to take out. And so then I became a stay-at-home mom, and it changed my children's development. It really does. But that expectation was still on us, to be that nurturer, to have that nurturer who was picking the kids up after school and sitting with them to do the homework and things like that. And, I looked down on women who didn't put their family first. I did as well. I try not to do it now, because I realize that, sometimes it's not a choice. And even if it is a choice, why isn't a woman allowed to make that choice? A woman should be able to make that choice just like a man does. A man doesn't have to choose whether to go to work or take care of his family. A man does not have to choose to go to work or pick up his kid from school. It's just assumed that somebody else will do it. But if it's a woman, it's like, what? You can't come to your kid's school play? Why not? You know, and we still kind of look that way. But so I think that's we have to be part of that change too. We can't look down on our noses at women who make the choice to work,
Well, yeah,
or who make the choice to stay home.
that's a good point that you bring up there. That like, I feel like sometimes women are other women's biggest oppressors. At least nowadays.
Absolutely.
Yes. And I feel like that was also depicted well in the movie.
It was,
probably with a
definitely.
composite character.
Right.
Kirsten Dunst's character.
Yes,
Yeah.
I really felt like the whole time I was thinking, if women would just rally together and help each
Right.
other instead of pick fights with each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was like the biggest, in the news when women were doing their women's march. Like if you look online at the message boards, Reddit, and all of that, the ones that were making fun of the women the most were other women.
Right.
That's probably something in their ego because they're not a part of it, or
they're threatened by it. They're threatened by
Yeah.
it in some way, and I think that goes back to the stay-at-home mom versus the working mom. The stay-at-home moms felt threatened by the working moms because they were afraid they were going to be forced to go to work. The working moms felt threatened by the stay-at-home moms because they were afraid they would be forced to stay at home. And really, we should support each other in those choices. And, it all comes back to another thing that came in my head. There was so many, as I said, composite characters. So the book is roughly about these three women who worked at NASA, but most of the other characters are composites of other people, just to ease the storytelling. And in one of them, one of the white, I'm not sure what she was. She was some kind of supervisor. She was played by Kirsten Dunst.
Over all of the women.
The women, yes.
Yeah.
And she said something about, I have nothing against y'all. She was meaning the black women. But this is apropos of all of this. Dorothy Vaughan said, I know you probably believe that. And she, like you said, she kind of opposed things all along, or she'd just say, there was resistance. This is just the way it is, or, blah, blah, blah. But it comes back to that point that people make all the time. If you are not part of the solution, you are contributing to the problem. Yes. You cannot just allow things to slide. You cannot allow things to be the status quo. You can't just say that's the way it is. You have to look for an opportunity to be the change that you see in the world. Or that you would like to see in the world.
And we all know that times are changing because everything has been moving more rapidly, like I say, exponentially.
Yes.
Even with other things with gender inequalities, I would say that we cannot come at it and be surprised when there is something new that changes, when someone is the first to do something.
Right.
You want to be ready to accept it so that you aren't being the force against it.
Yes.
Get out of your ego.
Don't be threatened by their advancement. Don't be threatened by someone else's liberties. They're not taking away your liberties. They're just seeking their own.
They're opening the door.
But it does not in any way affect your own liberties or your own station.
And if you have an idea, go for it, because if you don't go for your idea, then other people are going to.
and
I believe
and
we
tell
talked
your
about that
story.
before.
I think if any one of those women's stories had been told a long time ago, we might be looking at a different today. Like I said, we looked at the space race and stuff when I was in school. We learned about the race to the moon and all these things, but never once was there any mention of any females of any kind,
Except for the first female astronaut.
except for the first female astronauts, and that was a long time later. So none of that. None of that was brought to our attention, and that's because nobody ever told their stories. And so if we can't always control whether somebody else tells our story, that's not up to us. What is up to us is that we make sure our story is out there, that we tell our stories, that we document those things, that we share those things with other women, with our families, with whatever.
You never know who you're going to inspire.
Right. And,
Yes.
that comes back to a Becky Higgins thing. I always talk about her. She's the creator of Project Life and My Modern Story, which is a story documenting, or, to document your own stories.
Mhm.
And what she talks, one of her quotes is, you never know, who's going to be inspired by the stories that you tell. The story that you tell about your life today may be somebody else's survival guide. And
That's so
I don't know
very
if that's
true.
exactly the quote. I will.
I've heard
I'll put
something.
I will
similar
put
to
the
that before,
exact
yeah.
quote on the heard it on the podcast. But that when I read that, I thought that was pretty fascinating because it was something that kind of inspired me to start telling my story. And to share with Modern Musings, because I think that's what we're doing here is we're sharing our stories and hopefully inspiring other people to share their stories as well. And once all of our stories are known, then they're not quiet, they're not hidden anymore, and we shouldn't be hidden. We're as much a part of history as anyone. So
Yes, we deserve to be seen and heard.
yes. So, women in STEM, whoop, let's do it.
Yes. Do we have anything else, Kristen? You have anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think we covered everything.
Okay.
It was a very touching movie. I did want to say that.
I did too.
yeah,
I
thoroughly
was,
enjoyed
it was
it.
really well done.
Watch the movie.
I was
Great
ashamed I hadn't
actresses.
seen it before then. I
Yeah.
waited way too long to see it.
Yes,
Yeah,
and yeah, it was really good, and it's really
And a
sad
very good
to watch
book also. So if you haven't read the book, read the book also. I always encourage to read the book first and then watch the movie.
Yeah, I agree, but it was sad to me to also see and I think I'll say this. I'm just putting this one little thing out there. The girls, Kristen and Amber, were kind of surprised by some of the racist things that happened, or that
I wasn't surprised. It just
No,
affected
it's
my
it was
emotions.
just very
Well, no,
emotional.
I'm,
some
I'm,
of the things
I'm talking
that
about
happened.
like the scene with the police officer, because your first reaction to it was, "Oh, the police is going to help them," and I sadly knew what would probably happen when the police officer showed up. So.
It was just very, it's very shocking to like see that on film because it's not how we grew up. Now, Cindy,
Well,
I know you grew up in
It
that
is.
time.
Some of it is
like
still the
her
same.
having to
It is
run
how you
to
grew-
a different bathroom a
Yeah,
mile
right,
away.
Right.
because-
I
yeah.
grew up in with some segregation still going. Well, there still is in a lot of ways. It's just more covert and sometimes more overt. And I don't want to get into that at all. But I guess what I was just saying was that that was what a lot of what touched me with that movie, because it's sad to see so many brilliant people who were part of making this great history, and that they were overlooked for so long, and that makes me sad. And I'm glad that something good came for them in the end, even if it was hard fought. And this is the same true story of women in STEM from ages on, it's been a hard fought battle, and we don't always see it portrayed the way it was on this movie. Sometimes it stays hidden. There's probably things we will never know. I think somebody, was it you and me, Amber, or was it on one of our podcasts where we were talking about Mary Shelley's husband? A lot of people suspect that maybe her husband, or at one point in time suspected that her husband was the one who wrote Frankenstein. And
well, that not just Mary Shelley, but like a
lot
of
like
the female author known as George Eliot. She had to change her name to George just to get published.
Right. And so it happens, and there are many of those stories that will never be told. We will never know that was what actually happened. That it was actually a woman or whatever, because some man took credit for it. And I'm not saying all men are out there to get us or whatever. I'm just saying that history is gone. There is no record of it now. And that's sad. So that's one of the reasons why we have to make sure our stories are told, so that somebody else doesn't get credit for it. Hello?
Yeah, definitely.
My sister used to swear that she invented Velcro a long time ago. So Velcro tennis shoes, not Velcro. Velcro was invented by NASA or JPL or somebody for the space race.
That reminds me of Romeo and Michelle. I invented Post-its.
Post-its. Yeah. But so that's just that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Okay.
All right. What are we talking about next week?
Well, you are the hostess, so what are we talking about?
What are we talking about next week? And if you're interested, by the way, in any of our conversation with role reversal, gender, we also have a fun, I'm not going to reveal the title, but in the next coming weeks, we'll be talking about boss babes and role reversals and gender in relationships. But just a sneak peek on future coming episodes. There's more to come, because we'll be touching on this subject again in different aspects. But next week, we are talking about making your bed every day, and whether or not you do that, and why you should or shouldn't, or yada yada. So we'll be debating
that. I didn't make my bed.
I totally didn't. Not today.
Well,
Not today.
I didn't either. Yeah. No.
So that is up next week. Look forward to that.
All right. I'm looking forward to it.
And we'd also like to give special thanks to Red Door Studios, Creative Audio Tech for our music and recording equipment, and of course, where would we be without our listeners?
Yes.
So if you're just listening to the podcast, you're only hearing half the story, because we have 3 blogs, 4 actually, that come out every week related to the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
The 4th one is like a
Heard
supplemental,
it on the podcast.
Heard it on the podcast.
comes out on the same day as post.
Head on over to modernmusings.net and check out our blogs.
Yeah. And keep listening, and keep bringing your friends to listen too, because we like you and we want you to engage with us. We want to hear what you think.
We want to hear, join our Facebook group, MMC Chat. We want to hear from you guys.
Yes.
All right. Have a great week. Bye.
Bye.